Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. Now, the B20, of course, which is the business dialogue of the G20, plays a crucial role in shaping policy recommendations that drive inclusive growth, sustainable development, and a stronger cooperation between governments and the private sector. Of course, this is an important part, as you've seen with my interview with David Fawkes, in trying to make sure that South Africa has a positive pathway for growth to try and achieve the 3% GDP that the country wants, but also to curb the unemployment rate, which is hovering around the 40% mark. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Cas Coovadia, who is the Sherpa of B20 and, of course, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. And we're going to be discussing a lot of topics with regards to the priorities being advanced by the business community and how South Africa's private sector is engaging with them within the G20 framework. Cas, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good to have you on. Much appreciated.
Wa alaikum salam, and thanks for having me. Hello to your salams to your viewers. Yeah. And just one correction, I'm no longer CEO at Busa.
Okay.
All right. The B20 Sherpa.
Okay, no problem, no problem. We did mention it, of course, that you are the B20 Sherpa there. So no, thanks for that correction, Cas. Cas, as South Africa's B20 Sherpa, what are some of the key business priorities that you and the committee have been advancing on in the lead up to the G20 Leaders Summit?
Okay, so we've had 8 task forces that range from trade and investment to finance and infrastructure to education and employment to energy mix and just transition, digital transformation, industrial transformation, food security and agriculture, ethics in business. And these task forces had started meeting in March and finished their work at the end of August. And in these task forces, what we've identified, so if you look at employment and education, it's preparing youth and women for the future of work. On trade and investment, it's advancing open, fair, and rules-based global trade. So in here, we quite clear open economies, multilateral trade, but time for a reset for even multilateral organizations to be structured in a way that they reflect the global economics that we have today. And finance and infrastructure, mobilizing capital for inclusive, sustainable infrastructure, sustainable food systems and agriculture, providing food security and climate smart practices. Industrial transformation and innovation, enabling competitiveness through technology. Energy mix and just transition is ensuring affordable, reliable, and clean energy. And digital transformation is leveraging technology to bridge divides and drive productivity. So these are the sorts of key themes going through each of the task forces. And ultimately what we're saying is that we need open economies, we need free trade, we need multilateral institutions, and we need to work and build those multilateral institutions, but they need to be repurposed to represent the global economics. And that our theme is inclusive growth, prosperity through global cooperation. So we absolutely clear growth needs to be inclusive. It needs to lead to prosperity for the majority of the people in the world. And we can only achieve this through global cooperation.
Cas, how have South Africa's private sector played its role within this last year and its alignment within the global B20 agenda?
So firstly, the South African private sector has been extremely supportive of the B20. In the beginning, very few CEOs actually knew what the B20 was about. We then had a webinar with about 150 CEOs, and we got the Sherpa and chair of B20 in Brazil to speak to CEOs. And after that, they've been very supportive. So we've raised all the money we needed from South African companies or global companies operating in South Africa. The chairs we approached to chair each of the task forces are a terrific group of chairs ranging from Sam Shabalala to Paul Henratti to Rueda Redfin from Deloitte to Barbara Mulova, who heads up Bayers in Africa and is based in Nairobi because we put Africa at the center of this B20, and others. And they've worked very hard and played a tremendous role. So both from a sponsorship point of view, leading the task forces, participating in the task forces with their G20 peers and peers from other parts of the continent. South African business has been extremely supportive and have bought into the outcomes of the B20 and the recommendations we've handed over to the G20.
Cas, it's a question I asked David Fawkes from the Monetary Policy Committee, and it's a similar one I'm going to ask you. On October the 24th, we, of course, were removed from the grey list. How massive is that, given that South Africa, especially during the G20 presidency, and I know the B20 has been pushing for this, is to maintain South Africa as a sound investment destination?
No, I think this is extremely important. I think that, relatively speaking, we've come off the grey list in a good period of time. I think largely due to National Treasury, the Reserve Bank, people like Ismail Momaniat in the National Treasury, who's been tasked with this and has done a tremendous job, I think. And it's extremely important, and not just that South Africa is off the grey list, but Nigeria is off the grey list. And that bodes well for the continent. It says that we are, as countries, addressing problems of money laundering, corruption, and so on. We've still got a long way to go in our country, but we address the issues that the Financial Action Task Force raised, and the fact that we off the grey list shows and send a message to investors that we are a safe haven for investing. We will ensure that anti-money laundering legislation is in place and is being applied. We will ensure that we deal with corruption effectively. So it's a very big deal, and we are extremely happy that we're off the grey list. It also means that we can be more competitive in the way we raise money from people and funders overseas, because otherwise investors would be wary of lending money to South African institutions. So it's a very, very good development, and we commend those who have been working on it.
One final question before we go to the break, Cas. From a South African perspective, we're flirting around this 1% GDP growth mark, and the country is pushing. And I remember in the World Economic Forum earlier this year, South Africa had said, look, we want to push towards the 3% mark in terms of GDP growth. From a B20 point of view, how close or how far are we in achieving that 3% growth, Cas?
Look, I don't think we're very near, to be quite honest. I think that the partnership that businesses has had with government in South Africa in the last 3 years or so has borne fruit. We've made good progress on energy. We're beginning to make progress on logistics. And I think we'll see some progress in the crime and corruption side. But we still need to move very quickly to implement some fundamental reforms that are needed to essentially send out the message that we are open for business and we are open for investment, to create the environment for that investment, fully cognizant of the fact that we compete for investment globally. And we don't have to look too far. Countries on the continent just to the north of us are creating the environment for inward investment and creating that environment very effectively. So I think that we've got some ways to go. I think the government business partnership is now in phase 2, but I think that we do need to be absolutely clear that we're going to implement some of the critical reforms quickly. We need to be send out the clear message that we are open for investment and investors can invest in our country, having the confidence that their investments will be safe, that the assets they generate here will be safe, and that we will deal with the issues that are stifling investment to the country. So I think that the government business partnership, the trajectory is correct, it's in the right direction. But I'm happy that the government of national unity had a retreat in the last couple of days, and I hope that they've come out of that retreat united and on the same page about the critical reforms that need to be applied to attract investment and put us onto that growth path.
Yeah, we just got 1 minute. I want to latch on to that answer that you've just given about the GNU's retreat and the fact that all the leaders have come out with a united voice. It's an important part, isn't it? Not just from a political perspective, but also for investor confidence to see that this coalition government is still standing despite, a lot of the challenges that have been presented to it.
No, absolutely. I mean, the investment community welcomed the GNU when it happened because essentially the electorate in South Africa indicated through their voting that they want the parties to work together. They didn't give a single party an outright majority. So this was welcomed by investors, and I think we must pat ourselves on the back. We took a very relatively short time in putting a GNU together. There are countries in Europe under similar circumstances where it took, close on to 18 months to put a government of national unity or an alliance government together. So we must pat ourselves on the back. But I think that all the political parties in the GNU need to put the national interest above the party political interests. Difficult to do, I know, but that's why they're there. And I think business in its relations must hold them to account for that and must work with the government of national unity to enable the government to do what is necessary for investment and growth and inclusive growth. And civil society and others must hold the government of national unity to account on that. So I'm glad, as I said, they held the retreat, and I hope they are now on the same page.
We'll continue the conversation after the break with Cas Coovadia, the B20 Sherpa. Of course, we're discussing the role of the business part of the G20 presidency, a massive one, especially given that this is an economy that wants to see growth. And of course, business, be it within South Africa or outside of the country, will play a huge role with regards to that. My conversation with B20 Sherpa, Cas Coovadia, continues after the break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm in conversation with B20 Sherpa, Cas Coovadia. Again, shukran so much for staying with us, Cas. Guess what we're seeing right now within the world, a lot of shifts in terms of trade dynamics. Last week we saw President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump, of course, discussing the China-US relations. But we, of course, saw, the tariff uncertainties that have occurred during this year. We've seen inflationary pressures occurring and tighter financial conditions. From a B20 perspective, how are you and the rest of the organization addressing many of these challenges?
Well, look, the B20 itself can't address these challenges. We host the B20 for a year. That's almost over. We hand over to the United States, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, in November. And the role of the B20 is to develop policy proposals and recommendations to hand over to the G20, and then it's up to the G20 to accept and implement those recommendations. So the B20 as an organization or as an initiative has no secretariat. It doesn't exist. B20 South Africa doesn't exist after the end of the year. But what we, when we started this process, our advice to the chairs of the task forces was that, of course, you need to discuss the geopolitics and the impact of the geopolitics. But don't let that immobilize you. There are issues to discuss which are important for business, important for economic growth, and those are the issues you discuss. And you try to reach agreement on any impact on those issues that the geopolitics might have. And so I think what we've come out with is a set of recommendations that actually say that, look, despite what's happening geopolitically, and there are a whole lot of stuff for the politicians to sort out, that we are very clear as business, including American business, by the way. American C-suite people have participated significantly in the task forces. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, as well as other U.S. business organizations from America, have been very supportive of the B20. And what we're saying is that, global growth must prevail and must work through the politics. That we are absolutely clear that we do need to collaborate as the world, irrespective of what some administrations in some countries may be saying. We are absolutely clear that multilateral institutions are important and we need to work through those multilateral institutions. But as I said earlier, those institutions need to be reset to represent global economics and the different global economic blocks that prevail at the moment. We are absolutely clear that Africa is at the center of the agenda, not just for Africa's growth and development, but Africa's growth and development means a significant contribution to the world's growth and development, because Africa has the minerals and resources for the new economy, for the AI economy. Africa has the land and agricultural capability to actually address the food insecurity problems of the world, not just for Africa. And while in countries to the north, working age populations are going down because of aging populations, we have youth demographic in Africa, which if skilled properly and so on, can fill those gaps. So what we've tried to do through the B20 is put Africa at the center of the agenda, at the table where decisions get taken and not at the side of the table. And we're saying that despite the politics, the vast majority of businesses in the world, in the G20 countries, are saying that we need open economies, we need collaboration, must lead to inclusive growth that benefit the majority of people in our country, and that the only way we can do that is through collaboration. So that's a clear message from the B20 to the G20. And it's up to the G20 governments to now look at how they actually respond to that message and work their way through the politics that they have to deal with.
Cas, before the G20 Leaders Summit, the B20 Summit will be happening in Sandton, 18th to the 20th of November. There have been many discussions within the B20, many conferences, many summits that, of course, you've been part of, just to try and send the message and fulfill the agenda of South Africa's B20 leadership. How important will it be those 3 days, the 18th to the 20th of November, in not just stamping South Africa's authority as a perfect or one of the best investment destinations, but also fulfilling the agenda that was given to the B20 within South Africa a year ago?
So I think just need to clarify a couple of things. And we did this right at the beginning, even with business organizations in South Africa. The B20 doesn't represent South African business. The B20 represents businesses and business organizations from the G20 countries. So the recommendations we handed over to the G20 on the 4th of September are recommendations from businesses and business organizations in the B20 countries. South African business has been represented on the various task forces through CEOs and through business organizations, and they put South Africa's priorities on the table. Having said all of that, we believe that the summit will demonstrate how South Africa can actually put itself at the center of the table together with the continent. We will talk to the strengths that South Africa has for investment. We will be having on the afternoon of the 20th a roundtable hosted by the president talking about South Africa and Africa investment. So we will position South Africa and the continent as an investment destination. But we must be absolutely clear that the recommendations are G20 or B20 recommendations. And we need to now, the challenge now is for South African business organizations, together with organizations on the continent and businesses, to take the work that the B20 has done, the research, the experiential work, the lessons we've learned from other G20s, all of which are the backbone to the recommendations, and see if we can implement some of those recommendations as soon as possible and utilize that work to address some of the challenges we have in the country and on the continent so that we can actually leap forward on those challenges. And that's going to be the challenge for us going forward. And we've also, I've spoken to my counterparts in Brazil, obviously US. I've spoken to the British Business Organization when I was in London, because at indication they might be hosting in 2027, although that's not been finalized. And what we do want to try and do is to see if we can, between us, track these recommendations, because that hasn't been done before. See whether the recommendations are accepted, whether they implemented, and also look at what the impact of implementation is. And if they not implemented and not make an impact, to see what we do about that, so that we can report to businesses in the G20 countries on these recommendations, and they don't just become a policy talk shop, but we've fashioned the recommendation in a way that says, here's the recommendation, this is what needs to be implemented, this is a multilateral organization that should implement it, and this is the impact we want to see if it's implemented. So if we can get that right, then at least it's not just a talk shop. We can track these things, and we can show that the B20 recommendations are actually making changes in people's lives.
Cas Coovadia, always good to have you on. Shukran so much for joining us. Wa alaikum salam. That's absolute pleasure. That's Cas Coovadia, who is the Sherpa of B20. Well, that's all we have for you here on Mzansi Welcomes the World. If you've missed today's episode, you'll be sure to find it on our YouTube channel. From myself, Ross Patel, and the rest of the team, Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.